I'm Jonathan Larson with TYT Investigates, and you're watching TYTI Daily. If you don't already subscribe to our YouTube channel here at TYT Investigates, we are the original reporting arm of the Young Turks, and every weekday at 11:30 Eastern, we do commentary. If we have a new investigative or original reporting out, we talk about that. I'm on vacation next week, so I'm hoping we'll get our new investigative reporter, Tiwa Chang, up to speed on all the ins and outs of logging in and doing the commentary, in which case I hope you'll hear from him next week, but if not, I will be back after that. So I'm asking you to subscribe, even though, despite the fact that you've caught me on our least watched day of the week, Media Analysis Friday. And obviously I'm going to be talking about the media coronavirus, which I guess at some point I'm supposed to start referring to as COVID-19 or whatever it is. But until I feel comfortable with the new lingo, I'm just going to call it the coronavirus, knowing that there are many coronaviruses. So before we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about panic and hysteria and calm, and how we maintain calm and how we achieve calm, or at least how we get closer to it in a period where, in a week where our nation sort of seems to have reached a tipping point where we've collectively decided, why yes, I will set my hair on fire. The pictures of bare grocery store shelves are making the rounds on social media. Donald Trump is scaring the pee out of people by going on television and reminding people, oh my God, he's actually the president and this is how he deals with these things. So it's understandable that people are feeling anything ranging from panic to unease. I wanted to talk a little bit about that with the caveat that I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm just a human trying to navigate it, same as most of us are. So first thing I would say is go to the experts if you're feeling unease, go to the experts. But one thing that occurred to me in terms of how I approach this stuff is our panic about things is often defined less by the thing itself than about how we choose to think about it. And one thing that occurred to me was we are currently thinking about the coronavirus as something that is happening to us. And the framing of that, by definition, makes us powerless. It is happening to us. And I think it would help some people, I hope, it's helping me, I think, to think about it as things that we are doing. Meaning, what am I doing to respond? How am I preparing, both individually and on a collective scale, both for myself and for others, my immediate community, people I care about, people I've never met. And I think if we think about that as sort of like, I've got a to-do list and I'm working my to-do list, that may help us free ourselves a little bit from the paralysis of a thing is happening to us. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was in that regard, and I will get to media analysis because I know that's why everyone's here on a Friday. The other thing is that when we think about it as a thing that is happening to us, we should remember that there are other things that happen to us. We may not like the political or contextual reasons that Donald Trump brings up the flu, but it's not wrong to say that other things kill more people. And does that mean we should be freaking out about them? No, it also doesn't mean we shouldn't be freaking out about the coronavirus. But what's the difference between those things? A couple things. One is all those other things, we've internalized the what am I doing about it part, right? So guns kill a lot of people in the country every year. What do we do about it? A lot of us, most of us, I believe, are smart enough not to have guns in our home. That's a step we do without feeling panicked about it. Oh my God, there's a gun crisis. What do I do? I know I'll self-isolate from guns. We don't see that as panic. We see that as taking appropriate measures. But more to the point, it's something we've internalized, right? Guns aren't suddenly sweeping the nation, showing up in people's houses. There's no transition involved. There's no mental reset that we have to do. So the other thing to keep in mind about whatever panic or hysteria we're feeling is that it is temporary. It is what happens as your brain adjusts to including a new set of things that can happen and changing that to things that I do, right? I tend to think our fear of crime is overblown, but no one panics when they lock the door at night, right? No one panics when they lock their car door. I realize some people panic at everything. I'm saying, generally speaking, those are not super fraught activities for us. The other reason, of course, people are panicking about coronavirus at the moment is because, unlike those other things, which are relatively controlled and defined and understood in terms of their ability to surprise us, those factors aren't known about coronavirus, so there is an urgency about taking every step possible. So obviously that's another reason we are feeling panic. But again, we've already seen that there is a set of measures that people can take to restrict the spread. So we know it's out there. So our path to that set of measures may be a little rockier, maybe a little longer than more developed nations. There, I said it, more developed nations, but we know how to get there. So again, it's a matter of time. Is that famous spike going to exceed our hospital capacity at some point? It might. It might. We might have some gruesome, inhumane situations along the way. But again, that's not a first for human experience. We deal with it and then we get through it. With, of course, he said morbidly, the exception of those people who literally do not. So the panic doesn't help us unless we channel it into doing things. So, and I think channeling it into doing things also helps alleviate the panic on its own merits. The other thing I think that alleviates the panic is recognizing what is our media for. That's called a segue, folks. What are our media for? And we're in an interesting period in TV news history where, for instance, CNN sort of started off almost like what you would think headline news would be. Just, here are the headlines, here's what's going on in the world. What we have now is 3 cable news networks, as well as offspring, right? You can throw the Young Turks in there. All of whose DNA comes from the journalistic realm of, I'm here with new information for you. But they've all mutated to one degree or another to, I'm talking about new information that is already out there. That is a genre that's much more well known in radio, talk radio, called news talk. But we tune in because the DNA of the thing we're watching still feels like, and occasionally even honors the spirit of, I have new information for you. But if the news talk is making you anxious, and you're only sticking with it because you think the information aspect is going to be helpful, you can pretty safely drop out of the news talk if it's making you anxious. So with that, I want to talk about what are the media telling us, and more importantly, what are they not telling us? So as I said, what they are telling us is, yes, sometimes it is new information. This just in, the White House says it will support paid sick leave, whatever it might be. That's potentially new information. The death toll in Italy has now reached X, Y, or Z. Very little of that information is actually actionable. Most of it is emotionally actionable. You will have a feeling about it. That will create a sensation of you that is different from what it was before. Donald Trump is approving paid sick leave. Well, good for him. I love Donald Trump. Or, yeah, well, it's about time. He should have done that 2 months ago. I still hate that guy. Whatever it is, that's feeding an emotional need rather than a rational informational need, which is focused on things that are actionable. So let's talk about things that are actionable. And what the media are not telling you. So there's a story in the LA Times today. And by the way, I should have caveated way up top. When I talk about the media, I am generalizing. I am clearly saying generally, typically, this is your pattern. Are there exceptions? Absolutely. They tend to be critically acclaimed precisely because they are exceptions. So forgive me for not listing all of the exceptions. They're out there. I hereby acknowledge them in theory, in the abstract. But I'll have to ask your forbearance for the fact that I'm referring generally to the media. When I say the media, I hope everyone understands that I mean the typical media. So what are the media not telling us? So 2 kinds of things they're not telling us. One is the actionable stuff right now. The LA Times broke a story this morning. I'm going to share a few tidbits from you. share a few tidbits for you. Again, this is the Los Angeles Times report this morning. The Trump administration is not allowing states to use Medicaid more freely to respond to the coronavirus by expanding medical services. In other words, Medicaid is a federal program that offers resources to the states that they can use to help people who need medical services. Trump administration currently is not letting states do that. There is precedent for the federal government to do this. In previous emergencies, the Times reports, including the 9/11 attacks, Hurricane Katrina, the H1N1 flu outbreak, both Republican and Democratic presidents loosened Medicaid rules to allow states to meet surging needs. One of the impacts of the Trump administration not allowing states to do this is it's making it harder for states to quickly sign up poor patients for coverage so they can get necessary testing or treatment if they are exposed to coronavirus. And it threatens to slow efforts by states to bring on new medical providers, set up emergency clinics, or begin quarantining and caring for homeless Americans at high risk. This is actionable information. You can go to your federal representatives and say, this stops today, or I am going to make it my life's work to tell people that you weren't out there banging the drum to change this immediately. Reading from the Times again, the Los Angeles Times. One reason federal officials, health officials, have not acted appears to be President Trump's reluctance to declare a national emergency. That's a key step that would clear the way for states to get Medicaid waivers to more nimbly tackle coronavirus. But it would conflict with Trump's repeated efforts to downplay the seriousness of the epidemic. In other words, when the president declares something to be a national emergency, that has legal and bureaucratic implications. That unlocks a set of resources and tools that federal and local officials can now use to respond to whatever that emergency is. So what do the states want to be able to do? California and other states also want to ensure that mobile clinics and other temporary facilities set up to handle a crush of patients can bill Medicaid, which also would require a waiver. In other words, the usual Medicaid restrictions on this kind of thing, the federal government can sign a waiver for the states and say, go nuts, go to town. Godspeed. A number of states with large homeless populations, including California, Washington, and New York, are interested in potentially using Medicaid funding to help homeless victims of coronavirus who not only need medical care, but also housing and other services. And again, there's the human argument, which is be a human. And then there's the selfish argument, which is even if you are so utterly divorced and severed from your own empathy that all you care about is you and your own survival, maybe, just maybe, your own survival is abetted by reducing the number of homeless people walking the streets with coronavirus. Now, here's the other thing that the media aren't telling us. I went back and looked at all these CDC cuts this is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which were enacted under the Trump administration, but not only under the Trump administration. And they weren't secret at the time. They got reported at the time, but mostly in the newspapers. The amount of time they got on cable news, which is news talk, even though we think of it and we interact with it like as if it's news information, they essentially ignored it. And I know because I was ignoring it too. I was in cable news and I didn't do it out of malice. I just wasn't aware of it. I have typically in my career have tried to find stories that are not getting enough coverage and to boost them, but I don't remember ever seeing this on my radar, which means I missed it too. And I had good intentions. I'm not saying I was always perfect or scrupulous about acting on those intentions, but even with those good intentions, I dropped the ball too. And it's happening right now with something else, right? So right now, there is some animal out there, some species that both carries a virus or other form of disease that's transmissible to humans and is having its migratory patterns changed by climate change. And what species that might be, where we might be talking about, the diseases in question, I have no idea. But we do know with relative certainty that this coronavirus originated with bats. Now there's some reporting out there that there were actually bats in a Chinese biomedical laboratory. This is all speculative at the moment, but the point being, bats as a species, and I think it's the intermediate horseshoe bat, that species is susceptible to having its migratory patterns changed by climate change. And when animals have their migratory patterns changed, they are now bringing new biological entities, diseases, etc., into new biological environments, which may or may not be equipped to fight them off, etc. And the reason the media aren't telling us this is because, as I said up top, that's not their job. Their job is to fill the hour, and they do it the cheapest, easiest way possible, which is they book people who aren't experts, so you don't have to worry about them getting into weeds that you might be responsible for. They book people precisely because they do not know too much. And then they ask them to talk about things which are not disprovable because it tends to be speculative or future-looking. That's the easy way you fill the hour, but that's news talk. So if you don't need the news talk, and if it's not giving you anything, don't watch it. Me included, TYT included. Take care of yourself. If it's not helpful to you, at least on an emotional level. Someone posted yesterday something very nice that my video yesterday was the balm, B-A-L-M, that they needed for that moment, and that means something. And obviously, if you take solace from the media you consume, that's a good thing. That's okay. You should not feel bad about that, unless, of course, you're helping to support media that is generally bad and propagates bad information, which I know none of you do. Okay, that's my spiel for today, and I thank you for sitting, as always, through my spiel. And so the reason I ask you folks to join live every weekday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, if I hadn't mentioned, and to subscribe so that you get into the habituation of it, so that we can do the chat afterwards and we can have a conversation. And you guys had a really robust conversation. I was watching it go by in the morning, but when I first set up the stream. So I'm going to skip over that, I'm afraid, and just find the stuff that's responsive to the conversation we're having, because not everyone was there with you. Kellewana says, individuals do not have the power to affect change at the level we need. We need leaders who will act regardless of corporate interests, but in the interests of the people, our leaders are not. I had an interesting story I wanted to share with you yesterday, which I no longer have with me, about how our political system disincentivizes disaster prevention, right? We as a society, and including our media, but not just our media, have become so intuitive, so non-cognitive, if you want to put it that way. We're so acting on instinct that we don't think about, and we don't incentivize our leaders, our representatives, to think about long-term planning. One exception, of course, being all of you good folks who have been banging the drum about climate change forever now, for decades. History's heroes, like, absolutely no joke. Mr. Elder says, I love Medicare. There is no way I would be able to get health insurance, let alone pay the bill. That's socialism for you, keeping people out of poverty, destitution, and death. Okay, Weena Jensen is now speaking in Danish. Er du dansk? I'm sure I said that wrong, and I'm not even going to try the next sentence. I believe that means, are you Danish? We have an international audience, folks. Mr. Elder says, everyone should have health care provided by the government from the moment they are born, if not earlier. Imperator 1 says, and if Bernie were elected, we'd be a lot closer to it. Well, it depends on what he can get through Congress, right? That's a reality. That's a reality. People are allowed to pay attention to that. And I can't fault them for that. What if it turns out that Biden is better able to get people to the polls in a way that scares people meaning, his opponents, than Sanders is. What if Sanders squeaks out a victory and blue dog Democrats feel no fear and he can't get anything through? Maybe, just maybe, Biden could. We don't know. I understand all the arguments why, no, that would never be the case. I understand them, but we don't know, right? Obamacare was the creation, or at least Mitt Romney, if he didn't create it, he midwifed it into being, into a government, into a state government in Massachusetts, right? Our politics have been upended, and a lot of the old norms have been skewed, and we don't get to know exactly which results lead to which outcomes, which is frustrating. I get it. Imperator 1 says, and why stop there? Why not housing, education, food, and utilities, including internet for all? Oh, and throw in universal basic income too. Well, this is something I was tweeting about yesterday. That's at JT Larson if you want to follow me, which is this idea that, we've got to end this coronavirus so that we can go back to, we can end the moratorium on evictions and let landlords start making new homeless people again and stop providing free medical testing to people. Like, what kind of sense does that make? You've just disincentivized ending the coronavirus epidemic. Plus, it's a return to the system that got us here in the first place. Mr. Elder says people aren't as stressed when they have good health care that doesn't cost them and it covers everything. And they have reasonable assurance that pretty much everyone else is getting checked on a regular basis, and certainly whenever they get that horrific, now terrifying tickle in their throat. Curious Cleo says, just watched a CNN bit on Russian trolls working from Africa to mess with US elections. Sigh. Mr. Elder says Medicare right now doesn't cover everything, but if you get Medicaid between the two, it covers almost everything. That's why I like Bernie's plan. It combines the two and expands it. No Middle Ground says Russia is not doing this. It is the CIA. Hashtag Vault 7. Matt Mungan says, the thumbnail is scaring me, Jonathan. All right, so I will change the thumbnail. I'll grab like a headline from the article I was reading from or something like that. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare anyone. I am entirely oblivious to the disconnect between my mental state and my affect and how that actually reads visually. It's really a problem. I apologize. Gia Brown says, good morning all. I've been here for a while catching up. Good morning. Peter Zelenkoff asks the existential, does everyone ignore the like button? Do they? Why? Why would we do that? As a people, can we not find common ground on the like button? Thank you, Peter, for that impassioned plea. Sorry, gotta go in closer. Mornalith Calix says, hey buddy, newsflash for you. We are powerless as we all have to breathe. Well, I think having to breathe doesn't mean we're powerless. We can take steps to help each other and help ourselves. And when I say there's a middle ground between being powerless and being omnipotent, right? Just because we're not powerless doesn't mean we get to guarantee optimal outcomes for ourselves. It just means that we do actually have the power to change the odds, right? How we act both short term, not touching our face like this, but also long term in terms of our politics and paying attention and electing people who do pay attention to the long term. We have power across a broad range of things. Doesn't mean we win, right? Two football teams take the field, neither of them is powerless. One of them is going to lose. Doesn't mean they were powerless to stop it. Curious Cleo says, I hit the like a hero. Thank you, Cleo. That's kind of you. No Middle Ground says, I shall not panic. If I get through it, I do. It's the others that I can't help, and that scares me. Hashtag not me, us. I think that's a good, healthy way of looking at it. Mornalith Calix says this disease is spread in the air and it can linger for minutes. There are new reports out there that suggest that it can at least be suspended in the air. Whether it actually is spreading in the air, other than like an immediate cough, hanging in the air for hours, I don't know that that's been established. And if it is, I think most people are already attuned to that possibility, right? We understand what masks are and are not for. DLJ says, good morning from Brisbane, where it is 1:33 in the morning. You're up early, DLJ. Take care of Tom Hanks for us. Mornalith, again, I don't know how to say this, says, wow, absolute ignorance last few days on TYT. Well, where we get it wrong, at least I would like to know about it. So I hope you'll say something in the comments if there's something we need to correct. And goes on to say, here's another bulletin for you, buddy. We get bulletins now. Your job is to report. Why don't you report on how to keep yourself safe when you have to go out into the public? So my job is not just to report, just so you know. I also oversee our social media. I'm responsible for growing the platforms. That means sometimes I do commentary. It means sometimes I tweet. So my job actually is broader than what you're talking about. I also work with Jiwa Chang now to facilitate his investigative reporting. So, and in terms of why don't I go report on how to keep yourself safe when you have to go out into the public, well, I may have at some point in the past, but also my guess is that most people aren't coming to TYT Investigates for sort of basic healthcare prophylactic steps that they can take. There are more authoritative sources that people are seeking out, and that's not the kind of commentary we tend to do. So since I don't anticipate a large, significant number of people coming here looking for that, I don't suddenly morph and pretend that I'm like a science reporter qualified to report on that. Now that said, I'm sure over the past few weeks or whatever, I've mentioned a couple things along the way, but if not, that's okay too. So I apologize if my commentary on your news bulletin isn't what you were looking for, but I hope you understand the spirit in which it's intended. Jess says, just an FYI, since the COVID-19 panic, gun sales are up, ironically. That is interesting. I suppose you probably get that in any kind of situation where there's a perceived threat to the social order. People get scared. Mornalith Calix asks, what experts have you talked to? I have not interviewed any experts. I have read online what they have to say, including the CDC and others. But again, I should not be anyone's first stop for this information. No one comes to TYT Investigates for health tips on what supplies to buy or what procedures to follow out in the world. That's because we don't do science reporting, we don't do health reporting, right? Very few people should turn to only one news source for all the information in their lives, right? I'm also not doing consumer reviews for microwave ovens, right? But people might need that information too, so how come you're not giving it to them? Because that's not what we do, right? We do politically oriented or focused investigative reporting and commentary. Mr. Elder says, sounds like we've got someone in chat panicking. He or she is referring to John as buddy. I'd like to think I'm everyone's buddy. But thank you, Mr. Elder. Weena Jensen says, I can't speak for Jonathan Larson or the rest of the TYT staff, but a part of their programs are concerned with breaking down news coverage and social issues. Curious Cleo says, I believe his report is on the media's response and its effects, not providing coronavirus facts to us from experts. Jess says, I'm set for the most part. Stores always have rotating sales and I pay attention to them. One thing that I'm fully expecting to see, and I'm glad you're set, Jess, is we had this rush of like peak capitalism where everyone went out and hoarded things, supplies they will and will not need for the coming crisis. And my full expectation is that that peak capitalism, if it's sufficiently bad that some people are going without, is very quickly going to turn to peak socialism, where you are going to see people who have hoarded stuff now making it available to their neighbors, most likely for free. When that need is identified, or maybe even beforehand, they might be saying, you know what, I have 8,000 rolls of toilet paper and only one butt. Someone please take this toilet paper. Does anyone need this? Can I help? I hope things don't get so bad that that's where we are, but I do believe that that's who we are. Mr. Elder says the treatments for coronavirus need to be free healthcare. Companies won't cover it and most can't afford it. No Middle Ground says here, Fridays is strictly for analysis of, not reporting on the news. I will say thank you for the defense, No Middle Ground, but I do occasionally break my own rules because it's my channel. So I guess I should broaden it from my job is, to some extent, whatever I want. I'm the managing editor. I run TYT Investigates. We've got a Facebook page, which I'm not paying much attention to lately. We've got the YouTube channel. I'm just coming off having been neck deep in Buttigieg stuff, but I also have a vacation coming up. So part of what I need to do now is decide to some extent, what is my job, right? Obviously, working with TYT to make sure that he's doing the best work he can and we're supporting him as best we can. That's part of it. But in terms of the rest, I'm constantly figuring out what should our job be now? If Facebook changes their algorithm, which they do every once in a while, I have to figure out what's my job now. So the basic ethos behind it, right? Reporting, unearthing new information that matters to people, that will always be there. But beyond that is the job of figuring out, well, what should we be reporting on? How should we tell those stories? What makes those stories get the attention they deserve? All of that is part of my job. And my definition of how to do that changes on a fairly regular basis. Harumph. Mornlith Calix says, thanks guys, and maybe I'm in the wrong here. I thought this was about investigating. So again, thank you for being open-minded. It is about investigating, but investigating doesn't stop and start, doesn't begin and end with just we do a story. It's also about us talking about which issues merit investigating. How do the results of those investigations get reported? How do they get talked about? And as well, just because you do one thing doesn't mean you don't do anything else, right? So the fact that we're called TYT Investigates and we do investigations doesn't preclude us from also offering commentary, right? When we do our investigating, we learn things, right? And the things that we learn sometimes inflect or contextualize the political debate that's going on out in the world. So why wouldn't we use what we learn to talk about it, to talk about other things? Oh, we just got a super chat from, is it going to tell me? N Starks 007 kicks in $5. Thanks again, N Starks 007, asking, do you think the pro-insurance people will STFU, look it up if you don't know what that means, after the industry literally tried to price gouge in the midst of a pandemic? No, no, I do not. I think, well, I should take that back. I think to some extent it depends on what comes out about what exactly they did and how they tried to do it. So we will have to see. Leslie Love says, I follow doctors and scientists on YouTube to get updates and guidance on what to do to be proactive. Leslie names a few, which you folks can look at in the chat and check them out and see if they're worthwhile for you. Mr. Elder says, I can't afford to stock up on things. So this is a problem, right? This is not only a problem for Mr. Elder, and by the way, I'm sorry that is a problem for you, but that's a problem for tens, if not hundreds of millions of people, right? What's the statistic out there is something like, you know, there's some percentage of Americans, like a big percentage, who are $400 away from economic catastrophe, right? One unexpected mechanics bill for the car, or damage to the house, or an illness. And that affects all of us, right? If people are in circumstances that dire, even if you don't care about those people, that will still impact your life eventually, most likely. Cheeky897 says, my state in Germany have just closed down all schools, kindergartens, universities. It's being reported that all states will follow next week. Gia Brown says, jail, so this is murder. It's de facto killing people. And if it's true, this report from NPR, that Trump specifically killed early testing because he didn't want the resulting numbers to make him look bad. Good God. Good God. No middle ground, quoting Fauci, saying tests are a week away. They were a week away last week and the week before that. Cheeky897 says, parents who both work full-time jobs are able to take turns staying home with no pay loss to take care of small child. Dennis Miller says it is happening to us, but we have yet to create a policy as a nation. Don't use false equivalencies. I'm not sure what that's in reference to, but generally, yeah, that's a good idea. El Afrotano says, Trump isn't going to do or say anything that may make clear that he was wrong. He'd rather let people rot. Mr. Elder says, I worry about my birds if I get it because I don't know if coronavirus can affect birds. Our bird actually died last night, so... And it was very sudden. And reading up on it, I found out that birds will appear very healthy right up until the end because evolution has kind of designed them, natural selection has designed them to mask weakness, to mask illness or frailty, because that makes them targets for predators. So, but it also means that we have very little time to actually help them because we don't know either when they are sick or ailing. Dally1107OU says, as far as I'm aware, it can't go back to animals that easily. Bernie's Bro says, I'm wrong. Coronavirus is from an anteater. Bats was from SARS. I think this is a form of SARS, but I could be wrong. Anna Hart, Borrelia, etc. says, man, I wish you guys would investigate ticks and climate change. Fits perfectly in with this subject. Well, we did just bring on, thanks to your support, crowdfunding by the TYTI Army, we did just bring on T.Y. Chang, an award-winning veteran investigative reporter, to look at climate change. So if ticks and migratory patterns end up in his sites, then we'll get there. Sorry, guys. Vodka Not B67 says the panic buying will ease soon. It usually does after a week and the sky hasn't fallen. Jane Wright 315 says go to the World Health Organization, not the experts who are more concerned with the economy. Michael Pamoulis, I hope I'm saying your name correctly there, Michael, says, are you affiliated with the Young Turks? I'm not just affiliated with the Young Turks, I am part of the Young Turks. The TYT and TYT Investigate stands for the Young Turks. So the difference is that the Young Turks does opinion programming. And TYT Investigates was set up a couple years ago, 2.5 years ago, I want to say. God, coming up on 3 years, to do investigative reporting. And that is our primary mission. That is primarily what we do. You see more of our commentary because pound for pound, it's a lot easier to do occasional commentary than it is to come up with the information to generate a new article. And an article might take only 5-10 minutes to read, but it took a week, 2 weeks to put together the information. And not only do you have to find the information, then you have to check whether it's true. And then you have to ask other people to respond to that information. And you have to decide then, how do you tell it? And then you have to fact check it, and then you have to publish it. So it's a little bit easier, harder, and much more time intensive than reading an article, turning on the YouTube Go Live button at 11:30 and spouting your thoughts and having a conversation. So yes, we do some of the commentary stuff that the Young Turks does, but the reason you only get half an hour, it's not scripted, that's not a studio, is because that's not most of what we do. Most of what we do is invisible until we come out with an article. Ian Sutherland says they saw someone selling a roll. I assume maybe you mean toilet paper or a bread roll. I'm not sure. For $20 in Facebook Market. El Afrotano says I went to Target this morning and it was jam-packed. Many empty shelves. All I needed were some basics. Well, again, folks, if you need basics, there are probably social media groups, whether it's Facebook or otherwise, that are about and focused to and dominated by your community, your physical, geographical community. If you need something, let folks know, right? Hey, can anyone spare this, or barter this, or sell me this if you've got some extra, right? That's a good thing, to build those social networks. And yes, you can figure out how to work in social distancing. You can make a drop here and in exchange for a drop over there. Do what you need to be safe, but protect yourself. Reach out to your neighbors. DLJ says, anyone else suspect this is all a hoax, a marketing campaign by Kleenex? Let's keep in mind, I assume you're kidding, but people are dying, and people are sick and people are scared. So I think the most responsible thing we can do is to avoid even joking about the idea that it's fake or what have you. Ian Sutherland says, a few days ago, a reporter in Washington State visited several emergency rooms and reported that if someone has insurance, COVID-19 test was $100 to $500. No insurance, it was $1,500. So why would anyone get tested? Well, of course, the reason you would get tested is because you don't want to die or pass it on to people you care about, especially older or immunocompromised people. But the crazy thing is, as a society, when you put a price tag on something, you disincentivize it. We want people to get tested. If anything, we should be handing out $10 bills with every test for someone who's symptomatic or has been exposed to someone. El Afrotano says Target employees looked half dead. They are working on overdrive right now. Yeah, let's take a moment in all of this to remember that the folks still working in a physical space where they are dealing with lots and lots of people, they probably have a fair amount of anxiety. So let's be respectful for their physical concerns about their own health and also for their emotional state, right? It won't kill us to say a kind word. Vodka Not B67 says, I remember Y2K. Couldn't find batteries or things like that for a week or so, and then they were overstocked everywhere. Friendo says, you kind of look like John Oliver. Okay. Mr. Elder says, as climate change gets worse, more and more pandemics will happen. So it is very important we get Medicare for all, otherwise Americans are going to be screwed. Imperator 1 says, yes, especially as new viruses come from the melting ice caps. So you guys are having a fight with Paul B, I guess, but I haven't seen what he said, so I can't chime in. Jacobo Fernandez says, is Trump positive for COVID-19? Well, reportedly, he's not even getting tested, so we don't know. Mr. Elder says, not just ice caps melting, but too many people living close to each other will make the spread of things worse and be the cause of more sickness. Not just too many people living close to each other, but the changes in not only animal, but human migratory patterns, right? Climate change is going to create refugees. Refugees means people with different biological systems, meaning like gut interior bacteria and things like that, different immunities or lack thereof, going into new communities. And if they're refugees, it means now they're living in a collective where it's just, that's gasoline from an epidemiological point of view. James says, I'm pretty sure I already had COVID-19 and I haven't left the house in months, and I live in a small town in Upper Michigan. I'm almost 2 weeks out. If you haven't left the house in months, it seems fairly unlikely, I would guess, that you have this, unless you have some specific reason to think so. One thing to keep in mind is, of course, a lot of the symptoms for COVID-19 are pretty similar to symptoms for other things as well. Okay. Friendo says Canada is barely impacted. Still, there's no toilet paper or hand sanitizer due to American media virus fear. Okay, guys. Weena Jensen says, why are all my fantastic comments being ignored? Does anyone understand how much effort one puts into perfecting a response? I apologize, Weena. I thought I read some of yours, but I don't. Maybe I missed them. I apologize. Jesse Miner says, we need to stop eating animals. Every major virus stems from animal agriculture. Very powerful argument. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye, guys. I hope that what I had to say about resisting panic at the top made some sense and was helpful, but it seems to me that you folks, actually, I'm not seeing the degree of panic that I've seen recently, so maybe we're already on the downside of the panic and we're taking charge, we're taking the steps that we need to for ourselves and for the people around us. So I'm happy to see that, if it represents reality. And I am going to be off next week, but I will be back and I'll see you soon. And in the meantime, please take care of each other and take care of yourselves. Bye now.